I'll do that side. You do this small. Yeah, definitely. It's part of it's a bit weird. Why? Maybe it's not as I'm sure it does. So we're live and they're not starting. Okay.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the UCLU Medical Society's second public debate of the year in association with Medicine, a Very Fine Society. The motion is that this House believes that Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean. Right, so to introduce everyone, I am the president of UCLU Debating, Ross. This is the vice president, Emma, and there is Keith from Medicine. We're just going to talk for a little bit about our society activities, and then we're going to talk about how the way this debate will work, and then we will begin. So firstly, stuff UCLU Debating does. We do these public debates every Monday at 7 p.m. They're on a variety of different things. We've already had one on nuclear disarmament. Later, we're going to have one about what's the cause of racism. We're going to have things on ISIS. We're going to be talking about austerity in the UK, whether it's been successful or not. So very, very interesting things and lots of free wine always. The other thing that we regularly run is on Thursdays at 7 p.m. We have training in how to debate yourselves, run by our very fine training officers who are hovering around here somewhere. We go there, have a little session on a particular area of debating, and then we split up and do debates. And based on going to those, if you want, you can yourself go to debating competitions around the UK. Just this Saturday, we have the KCLIB, at which many of our members had great success. And last weekend, we had our own competition with Luca, who's sitting there, having a great time running. So we do a lot of fun things. And if you want to get engaged with them, now that Try It fortnight is closed, to get involved with training and with going to competitions, you can buy membership of our society, which is at £10. You can get that online by just googling UCLU Debating. It's quite a steal because you get free booze and you get stuff like us paying for your entry fees to these competitions, at which you get free pizza and free socials and free discussion about fun stuff. So I definitely think it's if you were going to buy one membership of one society, it would be us. The second would be medicine, of course. So that's the things we do. And now, I think that Keith has something she wants to say about what medicine do.
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm Keith, and I'm a medical student, and I'm part of UCL Medicine. I don't know how much you know about this organisation, but it's a student network working together to promote gender equity, issues of global health, and so on and so forth in a multidisciplinary effort. It's not just for medical students. So, this event that we're happy doing with UCLE today centres around the migrant crisis. We will be running, as part of UCLE Medicine, a series of events that centre on the theme of crisis. So, quickly Google what crisis means. It relates to a time of intense difficulty or danger, or, more pertinently, a time when a difficult or important decision must be made. And I think that's the most important thing for students, how we, as a student body, can actively be involved in when these important decisions are made. If this sounds like something that's appealing to you, you should come along to our certificated course, where this is the first event as part of the Tribe fortnight. Our second event is on November the 3rd, and that will be with Association of Street Doctors, an organisation that works with ex-young members and current young members to promote health. We will also be having an event on November the 24th in collaboration with Surgical Society in order to look at global surgery. And on December 15th, we're collaborating with Gender Equity to look at before, during, and after the effects of conflict and gender upon each other. Thanks.
Awesome. And now we have one more shout out from the UCL Debating School Programme.
Hi, I'm Sylvia and this is Conrad. We are the school's chair this year. So really what we do is we run training workshops and competitions for debating workshops and competitions for high school kids. And so on the 9th of November, which is the Monday of Reading Week, we're running a workshop here at UCL. We're expecting around about 50 kids at the moment, and that number we think just might go up. And we'd really, really love it if as many of you come and help out with the training workshop. That would actually entail running the session itself or helping somebody who's a little bit more experienced but still working with kids.
Okay, so if that sounds like a cool thing to any of you, there is a Google sign-up sheet that is on our Facebook group. Also, you can come and chat to us if you have any more questions about how this is going to proceed. We are going to have a short training session for you before Reading Week of 2 hours, where we will explain how the program is going to work and how projects are going to be delivered. It's great fun. We get to do something really cool for the society. It's a great way to engage with it. And it's a great experience, probably something you might put up on your CV. And it's a brilliant starter to doing more things with us this year. We'll also be running a competition later. And you're greatly encouraged to do it with us. And we hope to see as many of you there as possible to ensure that the event is running smoothly. So do chat to us and do take part. It's awesome. Thank you. There's a link. Where?
On Facebook.
On Facebook. Cheers.
Okay, so those are the shoutouts. One more thing before I introduce the format we're going to be using. Please do not record the speakers on your own mobile phones. We are running a live stream at the front. If the speaker doesn't wish to be included in the live stream, then it's safe to begin your speech and be shut off. And also, remember that speakers here are not necessarily expressing their own views and are definitely not necessarily expressing the views of the institutions they represent. So remember, you might see someone from Doctors Without Borders speaking. That is not the opinion of Doctors Without Borders. Okay, now, what we do here, how we debate, the way it will work is that each speaker will have 7 minutes to make their primary speech. The first proposition speaker will make a speech, then the first opposition speaker, then the second proposition speaker, and the second opposition speaker. At 1 minute in to each of these speeches, we will make one bang on the gavel, like that. At that point, anyone from the audience, or indeed any of the speakers, can ask for a question to be put, can try to make a point of information to the speaker. You can do that by standing up and saying, on that point, or point of information. The speaker can accept your point, please try and limit it to about 10 to 15 seconds, or they can say no and you should sit down and accept it, maybe try and work on it later. I think this is a good way for people to engage in the debate, but do remember that if it's not accepted, you can't just make it out of the blue. At 6 minutes, it'll be another bang, and at that point you can no longer ask questions about points of information. And then at 7 minutes in, there'll be 2 bangs, and that's a sign that we're getting to the end of their speech and they should wind it up. At 7 minutes, 15 seconds, we'll bang some more to try and get them to respect the time they're there. Okay? So that's how the main speeches go. After the main speeches happen, then there's another opportunity for the audience to engage. You can come down and make a floor speech on this issue. You can make a floor speech in proposition, i.e. agreeing with the motion, or opposition, i.e. not agreeing with it, or in abstention, which is neither one nor the other, thinking that there's something wrong with the motion or you just want to mention something but can't choose a side. Each of those speeches will be 3 minutes long. There'll be 1 bang at 30 seconds in, and then a consultation will be offered. 1 bang at 2 minutes 30, they can't. 3 minutes, 2 bangs, that's your time up. The reason you might want to engage in this way is that you can win things. You can win a box of lovely chocolates, or the prize I regret to say most people usually take, the bottle of port. And you can also just display your immense public speaking abilities, which I'm sure many people have. After the floor speeches, we'll have the final phase of the debate, which is the summary speeches. Opposition will go first, and they'll have combined 4 minutes to summarise what they think of the debate and why they think they've won it. And then proposition will have 4 minutes to make it. The last way in which you can engage, which I think you by now noticed, is the Twitter feed. You can tweet with the hashtag UCLU debating, and there is a moderator, so don't tweet things without thinking or silly things, but if they're good, they'll be put up there. If they're not bad, they'll be put up there. It's a great way to engage if you don't actually want to speak, but you still want your views to be heard. So I'll repeat all of this before each section, so there's no need to write it down or whatever. But that's the format and the way our things work. Now, I'm going to introduce the speakers that you see before you. Firstly, speaking first in proposition, we have... Yes, excellent. We have Lee Davies, the Executive Director of Doctors of the World UK. Doctors of the World continue to support life-saving efforts of over 300 programs operating in more than 70 countries, and of course has been extensively involved in the migrant crisis, where they've been the only charity providing medical help to refugees, including psychosocial care on the ground in Cali as far back as 2003. The first speaker speaking in opposition is Ed Massey, you can see there. Ed worked as an analyst in Brighton. As a debater, he has won competitions in the UK and Europe and was the 6th best speaker at this year's European Championships. He's a strong supporter of the effective altruism movement and believes it should shape our approach to the refugee crisis. Speaking second in proposition of this mission, Albert White. Albert works as a press officer at Medicines Sans Frontières UK, otherwise known as Doctors Without Borders, a very famous and effective and doing good organisation. And she also works as a journalist at the BBC. And speaking in last on opposition, not currently present because he's running a bit late, but he will be here and will come in during, we hope, the gap between first proposition and first opposition, is Ben Harris-Queen. Ben Harris-Queen has been involved in politics and international relations for a decade, having worked on foreign policy in both the UK and European parliaments. He has also advised the US, Spanish and Chilean governments on security and foreign policy issues, as well as opposition parties in Bahrain, Albania, Sri Lanka, Cuba, Venezuela and Bolivia. He is currently chairman of the Bar Group, which is the oldest UK Conservative think tank. Can I have a big hand for all of our speakers? Excellent. And now, the last thing, before we begin the debate menu, I'm going to call a vote based on what people think about this issue right now. Because sometimes we're really very biased, and the vote at the end doesn't represent how well the debaters have done, just how people feel about the issue. So in order to figure out how they have persuaded you, we'll hold the vote at the beginning and the vote at the end. So now, for how you feel on this motion without having heard from any of the speakers ready to pontificate on it, I'm going to hold the three debate votes. Firstly, I've got everyone in place. Who votes for a proposition? Who is in favour of the motion that this House believes that Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean? Okay, hands down. And second, I'm going to take the opposition. Who opposes this motion? Who does not believe that Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean? Keep your hand high. Thanks. And now, for the final position you can take, who believes themselves to be an abstention from this House believes that Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean? Neither one side nor the other can't make up their mind, thinks it's not expressed well. Who would place themselves in abstention? Okay then, we've had the vote before. The only thing that we have to get to now are the speeches themselves. So, can I please welcome to the floor the first speaker for proposition, Lee Davies.
Thank you very much indeed. Since I only have two uninterrupted minutes, maybe I should say two things. Firstly, thank you for voting. I probably shouldn't say anything more than that, but I will since we're here to debate. So thank you very much for coming and thank you for inviting us to propose this motion. Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean. There are, in our view, three interrelated reasons why Britain has failed refugees globally. Those are cause and effect that our doctors, nurses, psychologists and support staff witness firsthand every day in three different contexts. And those are the three interrelated reasons why I would argue Britain has failed refugees. Firstly, in and around Syria. Secondly, in southern Europe. And thirdly, in Calais. I just want to say a few brief words about those three things that we see firsthand, which leads us to believe that Britain has failed. Firstly, in and around Syria. I'm sure you know that a third of the population of Syria has been displaced by 4 years of fighting, something like 7.6 million people. The 5 countries neighbouring Syria accommodate something like 4 million refugees. In Lebanon, 1 in 5 people, imagine 1 in 5 people who live currently in Lebanon is a refugee from Syria. Inside Syria itself, the health system has all but collapsed. We see egregious violations of international humanitarian law because healthcare facilities and healthcare workers are deliberately targeted by the belligerents. This is never acceptable in any situation of armed conflict, and at one point it was a crime for doctors to carry medicine who were imprisoned and incarcerated for no legitimate reason, and certainly in violation of international humanitarian law. So, after 4 years of fighting, after £1 billion of British taxpayers' money, Britain has failed to stem the flow of refugees who are forced to flee Syria. And they're forced to flee Syria because civilians live in fear of attack and they lack access to basic essential services like healthcare, but also education, sanitation, and safe water. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a spectacular failure which leads 2015 to go down in history as being the creation of the worst refugee crisis since the Second World War, certainly the biggest, potentially the biggest displacement of people since the Rwandan genocide 20 years ago. UK contribution in the Middle East, it's a lot, right? £1 billion. Actually, it's nothing when you know that the United Nations needs something like $8.4 billion to meet unmet humanitarian need caused by that seemingly intractable conflict. And that conflict, of course, is something that also forces people to take the very perilous journey across the Mediterranean. So secondly, I want to talk a little bit about southern Europe. Our doctors on the islands like Lesbos are absolutely overwhelmed. In the last 8 weeks alone, something like 1,500 to 2,000 people have been arriving by boat to that island. They arrive exhausted, confused, bewildered, and they lack information about where to go to get assistance, information, and the help that they need. They then have a 3 or 5 hour walk, something like 50 kilometers to reach the nearest camp, where conditions, I can say, are less than favourable. The reason Britain contributes to a failure to assist and protect those refugees who do make it to places like Greece is the failure, after many, many years, to harmonise or to regularise, systematise the way in which different EU member states treat asylum claims. So those who do arrive and make it safely inevitably want to move on because different EU member states treat asylum claims very differently. And this is one reason that people continue to be on the move. And thirdly, some of those people, very small proportion at the moment, something like, well, the BBC reports today 6,000 people. It's a very small number of those people, of course, do make it to Calais, to the Pas-de-Calais region of northern France, where there are a number of refugee settlements that you've probably seen through media reporting, a camp called the Jungle. I was in that camp again about 2 weeks ago. The living conditions are absolutely diabolical. It's a humanitarian emergency of the first order. People are living in overcrowded, dirty conditions. There's very little access to adequate nutritious food. There are a very small number of water tap stands for about 3,000 people who live in that camp. The provision of these services falls way, way below internationally agreed standards for the protection and assistance of refugees living in Calais. Do you want to do something?
So what kind of help would you want Britain to give to these migrant camps?
Yes, in Calais specifically? Yeah, okay. So you know the British government has sent £12 million of UK taxpayers' money to Calais to build fences. The fences are extraordinarily high. And we've written on several occasions to the Immigration Minister, James Brokenshire, you could do that too, that would be helpful, to say you could just spend a little bit of that money on immediately necessary medical care for refugees who are not only living and suffering from so they're suffering the medical consequences of living in diabolical conditions like scabies. That was extremely highly traumatized people. A desperate situation triggers all sorts of difficult memories for them. And increasingly we see women and children who are particularly vulnerable. They need particular services, but those are not being provided. So what should Britain do? 4 things. 1, Britain has a remarkable reputation globally for good humanitarian work. It could influence the international community to deliver an integrated regional plan in the Middle East that included the provision, for example, of livelihoods and education. Secondly, do better on the Syria refugee resettlement scheme. 20,000 people taken from the region to the UK is disgraceful. With the 7th richest economy on earth, we could take many, many more vulnerable Syrians. Thirdly, increase the pressure on the belligerents in Syria to stop attacks on civilians. And the 4th and final point, if you'll allow me, is to push for a political solution in Syria, because at its heart, that's what's driving this problem, and that's where Britain is found. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Danes for that excellent speech. And now I would like to invite the first proposition speaker to begin the case, the first opposition speaker to begin the case for the opposition to this motion. Everyone, please a big hand for Ed Mancy.
Okay, so there's this law in behavioral economics called Campbell's law, and what it says is that if you focus on something, if you measure something, and that's not exactly what you want, then you end up creating perverse outcomes. And we see this everywhere when we try and set policy and do different things. I mean, a famous example is in the Soviet Union, they had a factory, they rewarded factories for how many shoes they produced. So some factories just started producing less shoes because if you don't switch track, you can produce more shoes. And that's obviously absurd because people got pairs of shoes, which both have shoes. But it's something that we see every day in how we choose to relate to our charitable activities or our altruistic activities. But what we choose to measure and focus on is some combination of what makes us feel good based around the empathy of the images we see and the way in which we act. But that's not the same as taking a sort of scientific approach almost towards how we can do the best. And those two things are very different. And what I believe is that the actions the UK government has taken, though certainly not perfect, are much more closely aligned with the principles of someone who would choose to focus in the most rigorous way possible in doing the most good for the most number, and something that Benson and UCL will be proud of, instead of reacting to the galling images we see, which shouldn't actually sort of cloud our view. So how am I going to talk about this? And I think we'll start by looking at what we should focus on. And then after that, look at what the impact our choices have been on those who we focus on. And finally, if I have time, look at what duties we might owe people in these situations. But first, before we go on, I think there's one thing that we always have to accept in this, is that both sides will be able to continue to point to things which are awful and terrible. And that as a consequence of lots of actions, most of which are beyond their own reach, there is no good solution to the Syria crisis. And that even though things are going to be sort of unimaginably terrible on either side, that doesn't mean we can't still make comparisons and try and work out which is better of the two worlds to live in each. So firstly, who should we focus on? And this is something which seems simple to the point of being trivial, right? We should focus on those migrants in Europe, because we see it on the news every day. We see that picture which is on the front of all the newspapers. We're constantly told there's a migrant crisis, so there's this big issue with these people we care about, and that therefore is where the focus of our efforts should be. It's certainly where the focus of our public conversation is. But I don't believe that to be right for three reasons. First of all, when we look at the numbers of people, no thank you. When we look at the number of people, yes, there are lots of migrants in Europe we should be focusing on. But as the speaker before me has pointed out, that the vast majority of people who are displaced within Syria or within the neighbouring countries. And that's actually where most of the people who are being forced into situations like the one in Calais are living. Secondly, when we look at the makeup of the individuals, although of course there are women and children and other particularly vulnerable people within the camps in Calais and elsewhere, overridingly, the people who make the choice to come to Europe are those who are fittest, those who are most able. The family chooses to send the eldest sort of son, essentially, to go and try and make a better life and send back remittances and whatever.
Okay,
and actually, those who are most disenfranchised are those who are least able to move the camps and make that journey, and that's actually those who should also be trying to target most. And thirdly, when we look at ease of help, it's much easier to identify and deliver help in the camp situation we have set up in these countries surrounding Syria, but not Syria itself, than we do for people all over Europe. And how is Britain acting in helping those within Syria? Well, as always been pointed out, Britain has given £920 million already and has committed itself to 100 million more. That is the second most in the world, and it's by far more than the sum of every other country in Europe added together. I'll take you in a second once I finish my point. And having more than the rest of all the countries in Europe added together is a large amount and is doing a lot. Yes, it is the case that there's still more money needed. It is the case, but it should not be, it's unreasonable to expect them to provide the entire cost, but it is more than pulling its weight. And that money is being well spent. It's going to the UN and its NGO partners. And it's leading things like shelter, food, health, support for those affected by violence, psychological help towards children who have been affected. A huge difference to millions of people's lives, that £1 billion we created. And let's point out that, firstly, that you cannot have that. Actually, I'll take your point.
Okay, so you've spoken a lot about how we should be fulfilling Campbell's law of frontline results today. Isn't that exactly what we've done by not focusing on stemming the problem at the root in Syria?
I mean, I'll come to this later, but I think that when it comes to stemming the problem, firstly, that huge amount of money does stabilise the problem somewhat, makes the situation in the camps better. But also, there is no magical solution, right? As in that there is no political solution that includes Assad after he has committed the human rights violations, the gassing and use of chemical weapons of civilians. And there's probably no situation which is amenable to us, which includes ISIS, that beheads people for their religion, right? And so there is no like easy solution which we could focus on. That world doesn't exist. No, thank you. But so anyway, you can't both spend that £1 billion in Syria and then also take, as Germany has, a large number of refugees in Europe. There's a reason why Germany is lagging behind us in delivering help to those who need it most. That's because it's chosen to focus on problems back at home instead of problems abroad. But furthermore, I do actually think we have the right approach for those who are travelling, which is that already untold thousands have died making the journey. Already thousands on the hands of human traffickers. And there is no way without huge change within the European Union, how it's run, to be able to provide a safe journey to Britain for these people, particularly as those who tube escape from the camps would be the most vulnerable, and those who are making the journey are the least vulnerable. And actually what we need to do more than anything else, and it is awful, is try and stem that time. We see that when Italy in '98 had an amnesty for illegal immigrants, the year after we saw a large increase of people dying in the Mediterranean, a large increase of people being trafficked into sort of human modern-day slavery, right? And that's not acceptable and something that we need to get around. It's horrid that we have to make this choice, but it's the better of the two. I'm very proud to oppose.
Thank you to Edward Mancy for that very fine speech. I'd now like to welcome to the floor Alva White to continue the proposition's case.
Good evening, my name is Alva White. I'm representing UNICEF. I should say this is not my comfortable environment, but having recently met a lot of those people who made the journey to Europe, seeking safety and refuge, I feel compelled to be here to speak on their behalf. So, Britain has failed migrants crossing the Med. Well, first of all, I've got an issue with the word migrants. I think that probably summarises the problem of the debate. They're not migrants, they're people. If you don't, maybe migrants too loaded, maybe refugees too loaded, asylum seekers too loaded, but they are people. They're people in transit, moving one place, moving to another. It might be mothers, it might be fathers, it might be children, it might be unaccompanied minors, it might be fit young men, but they're all leaving and they are people. And I think this word migrant kind of fuels quite a dangerous rhetoric around what's becoming this unmanageable situation. So first of all, I've actually called them people in transit, people on the move. And where's Britain failed? Well, I can look at the multiple failures for Britain. Their policies are tokenistic and they are self-interested. We're going to take 20,000 over 5 years. 20,000 over 5 years. It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. We announced that after the UK and the UK government reacted to a very, very awful image that will always be associated with this crisis, which I'm sure you all know I'm talking about, of Ireland on the Bodrum coast in Turkey. He was his family and him, he didn't make it to Europe, and they were fleeing Syria. And after that, the UK government said, we're taking 20,000. And that was not necessarily a decision from Westminster, it was a decision responding to public mood. I would say that Britain has failed as a member of the EU, and the EU has also failed. Right now, as we speak, there are thousands, mixed reports, between 6,000 and 10,000 refugees being held at Balkan borders. Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia. It's raining, it's cold. There are families, there are children with pneumonia, there are pregnant women who need attention, there are people with diabetes who can't get the medicine they need. They don't have shelter, they don't have food, they don't have blankets, they don't have anything. Britain is part of the EU, and the EU is failing these people right now. It doesn't matter about how much money you're giving to Lebanon, it doesn't matter about how many refugees you've not allowed into the country, they should be providing shelter and basic care, and they don't have it. I would say thirdly, the EU has failed as a member of the global community. We've heard here from the opposition that Syria there's no easy solution. Okay, there's no solution, that doesn't mean there isn't a solution. And if we're not going to look at the root of the cause, then how can we ever find an actual long-term pragmatic solution for stemming what is actually a historical movement of people, the largest displacements in the Second World War of people from one place to another. So we have failed Britain's policies as an EU member state. We have also failed as a member of the global community. We need to look at the root of the cause. We need to find safe and legal channels for people to be able to flee conflicts. I would also like to pick up on one point about the fittest making the journey. I did see some fit people when I was in Kos, when I was in Sicily. So there we've got the main 2 points where people come. So you have people fleeing Libya, coming up to southern Europe, and people fleeing from Turkey into Greece. And the Turkey-Greece route is predominantly Syrians. I met families, I met mothers who lost their sisters. I met a mother who I asked her, why did you leave Syria? In Syria, I will die. My children will die. There is no future. No matter, you look a mother in the eye who tells you that, there's not really much you can say in response. I met children that had been seriously injured by power bombs and they couldn't receive the care that they needed in Turkey. So they took their lives to risk. They risked their lives. Parents risked the lives of their children to come to Europe to get the medical care they needed and to get the safety they needed. Returning back to the other route, the Libyan coast through to southern Europe, crossing the Mediterranean. People bring their life jackets. On the life jackets are written phone numbers, and I love you, Mum. And if my body is found, please contact this person. I know this is quite an emotive way of putting a point across, but it just demonstrates people are putting their lives at risk because there is no alternative. And Britain, along with other leading EU states and the global community, should be pioneering ways for people to be able to flee without having to put their lives at risk, without having to fuel smugglers' bank balances, without having to get organisations like MSF to have 2 boats in the Mediterranean rescue people alongside other militaries. Please.
Surely you must acknowledge though that we have already sent several Royal Navy vessels and other countries are committed to warships for the express purpose of fishing people out of the ocean.
Yeah, no, that's right. We sent Door. I think it was there for 8 weeks. It was really big and shiny and impressive and did loads of rescues. And then it came away and we sent a little boat called the Enterprise that has not done any proactive rescues. It sort of sits there and gets directed when it's needed to. So yes, we did do that, and it really did make us look like we were doing a good job. And that's what I mean when I say it's tokenistic. Britain said, we're doing that, we're saving these people. Ireland, Germany, Italy, they're doing that still now. They're making regular rescues. The Greek Coast Guard are making rescues. Private companies, fishermen, NGOs are making rescues. The little fraction of Britain did is pretty shameful in the bigger picture. But yes, we did do that. But yes, that's another way of kind of appeasing Britain's, lack of actual responsibility for the situation at hand. The other example I wanted to give you is Mohammed. He left Damascus when he took his daughter for a walk and saw 13 severed heads on metal poles by the side of the road. I would also like to just follow up on one of the other points that you made about the camps, the surrounding camps, Lebanon, Jordan, around Syria. People are there for 4 years now with conflict. The World Health Programme in Lebanon gives people $14 a month for their food. $14 a month. I think a bottle of oil costs $4. It doesn't go very far. They can't work. There's no hope. Their origin country is in a horrific conflict. They can't go back. They've got no future. Their children don't have an education. They're living in a refugee camp. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're going to take the only option you can and try and find yourself a better, safer, secure life for you and for your family. So I would call for less tokenistic gestures by Britain, which just kind of basically demonstrates their general failure in responding to the crises. They need to look at the root of the problem. They need to champion safe and legal channels for these people to flee in safety. They need to instigate an air of compassion rather than building fences and putting up borders. And I would ask, let's not wait for another tragic initiative here like that of Ireland. You know, these children are now out in the cold in Croatia, Serbia, Slovenia. We don't need another picture. We should really be taking responsibility and actually trying to solve the crisis rather than putting our hands up and saying it's not our problem.
Thank you to Alva for that very fine speech. And now I would like to welcome the final opposition speaker, Ben Harris Quinney, to continue the opposition's arguments.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for that warm welcome. I'm very sorry I was late this evening, but I've been cast as the heartless right winger tonight. And so actually I spent most of the day putting out a paper opposing the government's proposals to cut tax credits, and I did that just to sweep you up this evening. Now, I believe that Britain hasn't failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean because we're asking the wrong question in saying that. We have failed to distinguish economic migrants from asylum seekers and legal migrants from illegal immigrants. The vast majority in Britain, most polls suggest, and I agree, despite the UNHCR guidelines that asylum seekers should seek asylum in the first safe nation of arrival, I think the majority of Britons believe that we do have an obligation to take our fair share of asylum seekers, and particularly as one of the wealthiest and most secure nations in the world, that obligation should be somewhere near the top of the bill, I would suggest. But equally, the majority of people in Britain feel that immigration over the last 10 years has been far too high. And so we've got to find a way to marry up those two views in terms of what we prescribe for policy. No one can be certain the exact number of asylum seekers that are coming into Europe. What we do know is it's the largest movement of people since the Second World War, and at its conclusion, there is a very good chance that it will be the largest movement of people in all history. However, to counter some of the points made earlier, the fact is this has only really come into the public forum in the last few years, and the last year particularly, certainly with the photo of Ireland. And actually, this movement of people has been building for 5 years, and it's not just tied to what's going on in Syria, it's also tied to the Arab Spring, various sociological and environmental factors in Africa, as well as many of the conflicts going on there. So when we look at this crisis, we can't just assume that Syria is the cause. There's something far greater and far more fundamental going on here. And I would argue that the root drive of that is an economic migration as opposed to an asylum-seeking migration. And it is likely that the desired nation of final destination is a significant factor in all migrants' journeys. But I think it's very important to separate the asylum seekers from economic migrants, because actually in accepting one and all, or adopting a policy that opens the door to all, you are of course derelicting this nation's duty to asylum seekers. It is often the case that economic migrants have louder voices, are more aggressive. In the main, we are talking about young men when we're talking about economic migrants. And of course, many of the more vulnerable people that are genuine asylum seekers are often beaten to the queue by many of those economic migrants. Now, we've set out as a country that we're going to take 20,000 asylum seekers. Yes.
How do you propose we distinguish between economic migrants and asylum seekers, since the two are often conflated in equal measure?
Well, that's the key issue. And that's why the Bow Group, an organisation that I work for, put out a paper at the start of the year, which advocated setting up migrant processing centres in North Africa and in Turkey to try and deal with the problem as close to source as possible. I know that the point was made earlier that we need to be dealing with the problem as close to Syria as possible, but as I said, it's not just Syria that's the problem. And also, despite the fact that this country pledges to spend £1 billion on aid to Syria, and which is likely to increase actually significantly over the next 5 years, we're also planning to bomb Syria at the same time. Spend a hell of a lot more money, and I'm sure cause a hell of a lot more displaced people in doing so. So that policy doesn't make sense. The only policy that I can see that makes sense is to have some sort of agreement, not just across Europe, but across the wider West, including the United States and Russia, to try and come to some conclusion of how we can solve this issue together. Because what is certainly true, sir, just one second, what is certainly true, sir, is that not only are we being unfair to asylum seekers in taking this come one, come all policy, we're also being desperately unfair to southern European countries who simply cannot cope with the strain we have placed them under. And that argument is being obscured by the fact that we don't want to enter into an agreement with the European Union as a whole. But this doesn't need to be a European Union project. This needs to be, at the very least, a Western-wide project, if not a global project. And the idea that the United States and Russia don't have any role to play in this conversation, I think, is absurd.
Sorry, with all due respect, isn't your point about how Britain has conflicting policies within both planning on bombing Syria, creating more displaced people, as well as alleviating the situation? Isn't that a perfect way to support the case for how Britain has failed?
No, because of the fundamental issue that we're not separating between migrants and asylum seekers. I don't doubt that our intervention in Syria will cause more genuine asylum seekers, as our interventions in the Middle East have done over the past few years. But that doesn't negate the need to have migrant processing centres to sort between economic migrants, illegal migrants, legal migrants, and genuine asylum seekers. As I say, otherwise, I believe that is a direction of duty to the most vulnerable. To your point earlier, yes, all migrants are people. We're all people. Bankers are people. Assad is a person. But people have very different needs and very different desires. And I think you argue that we shouldn't be making tokenistic policy decisions. Well, surely if you make tokenistic arguments, they're likely to lead to tokenistic policy. And I think part of the problem with the debate that we have around this issue, and many other debates in politics at this time, is they are made more in line with the media agenda and tackling things that put forward, like the photos and like the anecdotal arguments that you put forward, rather than actually genuinely taking a responsible, global and holistic solution to the problem. And that is why I disagree with the proposal put forward tonight. Thank you.
Thank you to Mr. Harris-Quinney for a very fine opposition speech, and thank you to all the speakers for their very fine speeches. Now, as I said earlier, we will enter the phase of the floor speeches, and I will take, I remind you, 3-minute speeches from people in proposition to the motion, in opposition to the motion, and in abstention to the motion. As I said, there will be one bang at 30 seconds, and POIs can be offered. One bang at 2 minutes 30, and then no longer can be. And then one bang at 3 minutes, 2 bangs at 3 minutes, at which point you should begin finishing up your arguments. So, to begin things, can I get one floor speech in proposition to this motion? One person who believes that Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean. I can see an arm there. Can you please come down and say your name? Thanks.
Hi, my name is Alina, and I'm going to talk to you about 2 points today. The blurred line between migrants and refugee and Germany. So my first point is the blurred line, and the second is Germany. So my first point, there's an argument that those fleeing Syria mostly cross into Greece from Turkey, where they face no physical threats And surely that means they're not real refugees. Well, wrong, because Turkey is only obliged to deal with asylum applications from Europeans. And historically, Soviet Jews who requested asylum in America in the 1970s were not rejected simply because they passed through Australia. Not only that, but over the past year, Lebanon put into place terms that request Syrians either to pledge not to work or to find Lebanese sponsors, which means they are often exploited as free labor. So we have 4 million Syrian refugees outside Syria. Even if they all came to the EU, imagine a club of 50 million. I think in that club they would not substantially change the demographic. Europe has the capacity to welcome them, and Britain has a large capacity to welcome them. And to my second point about Germany, Germany has a new level of compassion for refugees. So it's welcomed 20,000, over 20,000 in the first weekend of September. So that's Britain's commitment by 2020. So it takes 40% of EU refugees. It's kind of become the land of hope. This welcomes culture, of course, is not universal, but it is showing in the trajectory where I hope Europe and Britain will follow. And for those reasons, I hope you propose.
Thank you to Alina for that excellent floor speech. I'd like to do a reminder. Floor speeches don't have to be 3 minutes. They don't have to fill up that time. They can, in fact, just be a short statement. If you don't feel that you have 3 minutes in you, you can come up and say something that you think about the debate without the need to give full speech. As well, I remind everyone that we are offering these prizes for the best floor speech. So there is a lot of demand, but I hope there's more after I say that. You can get chocolates or board. And lastly, as with the main speakers, we are streaming these debates. So if you do not wish to be streamed, mention that at the beginning of your speech. I'm sorry I didn't say it for you, Alina. And we will turn off the stream for that speech, because it's very legitimate to want to make a point in the debate, but not fully believe it, or not what you believes to be, broadcasted to the whole world. So with that in mind, I would like to ask for an opposition floor speech of 3 minutes or less, if you don't have 3 in you, on the motion this House believes that Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean. Does anyone have an opposition floor speech in them?
Sure, well.
Yep, I've got Caleb. Please come down.
So, my name is Caleb, and I did a public speech at SOAS the other week against the graphic portrayal of Syrian refugees in the media. Now, this is really just what I'm going to talk about for 3 minutes, and I think this needs to be addressed. So, firstly, as I put it in the tweet before, it's actually really awkward. People have said Aylan Kurdi over and over again. His name was never Aylan, it was Alan, the most British name that we can think of. But because we have an issue with acknowledging that these immigrants or migrants or refugees or whatever fucking name we want to attribute to them are somehow close to us, we try and ethnification them over and over again. Because the moment where we acknowledge that they're somewhat close to us, we feel worse about ourselves. Okay, so this point where we're trying to say that, oh, these people are somehow different from us, it doesn't matter. The point where we have to do that is even worse. Because people try and justify this photo as saying, oh, well, it elicited a response. And they say, oh, well, Aylan Kurdi's father wanted to be shown. Aylan Kurdi's father didn't care about the photo. All he cared about was being able to go back to Kobani to bury his son. But because we suddenly feel like we are suddenly self-righteous and self-justified in our strange, quasi-moral Western philosophy, we believe that now it's okay. Now, I just want to say this to you. If we had a white child who was dead and lying in the sand, would he have ever been shown in the media? Look at Sandy Hook. No. Look at Sandy Hook. We had 20 children dead there. And we claim that, oh, but this photo of Aylan Kurdi will get real change done. If the 20 white children who had died in Sandy Hook would have got real change done, wouldn't we have shown it? Wouldn't we have finally got that great gun change law in the States? Show in a second. No, because we still have some self-belief that their dignity should be protected. Sure.
Okay, so now we don't, we failed people crossing the Mediterranean and we failed more dead kids on a beach.
Because the point is, even if we fail them to so much degree, shouldn't they have dignity? Shouldn't they still be people? Shouldn't we still respect them to the same degree that we would ourselves? If it takes the dignity to be removed completely for them to be okay, then what's right with that?
They deserve more dignity in death than in life.
So the point at where you're dead, you can never reclaim that from him. So, okay, so he's now removed his dignity. He can never speak up. His family can't speak up. They now go back to Kobani. They never have any control of that image once it's out there. They're now forever known as the family of the dead Syrian child. Do you want them to be that an image which is always attached to them? I don't know. That was just my point, because no one else had an opposition floor speech to give. I just thought that was a point that should be raised. You can disagree, you can agree, so be it.
Thank you, Caleb, for that very fine speech in opposition to this motion. And now I'm going to take the speech in abstention to the motion. I remind people of what this means. It means that you neither fully agree nor fully disagree, or you think that something is strange, or you feel that the motion is imperfect. I see a lot of hands up. I'm going to have to pick someone. I'm going to go with you in the white shirt up there.
Okay. Yep. I'm from Hi there, I'm Orlando, and I'm actually speaking in absentia. I'd say that I am more in favour, but on account of Ed, some of your beliefs in effective altruism, I found them quite interesting. And in fact, I think that whole idea of removing the emotional sensationalism, which we see so much in the press, that's got to be part of the method in dealing with this issue. So just to go back to Alva's point of 20,000 people will be accepted into England, and that's pathetic. That's also pathetic in the sense that it doesn't, because this motion is about migrants who've already crossed the Mediterranean. As I understood, that 20,000 will come from those already in, or those in, they're not even official refugee camps in the surrounding countries. And then to go back to the Calais, the jungle camp, where I've personally been, I don't agree either with Ed that they are the kind of fittest, that the cream of the crop have finally arrived at Calais. However, I would say that if we're working on the basis of effective altruism, maybe it would be better not to spend 12 million, and Lee, you got closest to this in your point, that rather than effectively entrenching the UK in on an island surrounded by barbed wire fences, which, having spoken to plenty of the migrants, they can just cut anyway. They can still cut through them if they can't jump over them. But it's not really doing anything to alleviate the problem. So I agree that we should be instead focusing our resources and our money towards the medicine and the health aid, which is real great order. And perhaps also we should educate them, if not with some English knowledge, with some knowledge of France, where they happen to be, because when I was there, very few of them spoke either English or French. It was really quite broken. And I think that in the long term, perhaps, given that these migrants have made the journey, and this is what the motion tonight is about, those who have already come across and made the journey, that perhaps we should consider the most effective way to deal with that issue. And I think that I don't believe that consists of building fences, employing riot police. I think it would just be far better if we actually show not even necessarily compassion, but if we help them so that they could therefore later help our society and contribute, perhaps. So thank you very much.
Thank you to Orlando for that excellent speech in abstention. And now I'm going to go around and begin the circle again with a proposition speech. If I can get someone who's willing to give a proposition speech for this motion, it looks like I have someone up there in the blue jumper. Please come down.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Sophie and I'm speaking in proposition for this. Before any of you say, like, this doesn't apply to Calais, this doesn't apply to Europe, I'm going to talk quite specifically on Syria and the Middle East. I'll also put some figures into context here, because I believe we can quite easily compare ourselves with Germany at the moment. This year, Germany's pledging to take 800,000 refugees from the Middle East and Syria. The UK this year, over the last year, June 2014 to 15, took 166. Like, there's something wrong here. We have privilege. No, I'm good. We have pledged 900 million, and that's fantastic. I'm aware of that approach. But what I'm quite disgusted by is the failure to take on a more hands-on response. And while we are sort of reshaping this approach to migrants, and while we are waiting for this money to trickle down for people that need it most, this, in my opinion, is lazy, and a short-term response is completely lacking. Also, I'd say it's impossible to say that our government has succeeded migrants where they only grudgingly give a response and up their ante, in response to some quite harrowing images that go viral. So in summary, I would say that overanalyzing the impact on the economy has to stop for just a minute. We have to stop abstracting these actual humans as economic units. These people are in trouble. For me, it's too little too late from the government. They're in trouble and they need help now. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Sophie for that excellent speech in proposition of the motion. And now, as before, I would like to take one speech in opposition to this motion. Someone who is in opposition to this House believes Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean. Seems I have two hands there. I will take the girl in white.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
opposition speech. And now, to finish the trio, I am going to ask for an abstention speech. Can I get a speech in abstention? Someone looks very eager up there, so can I have the guy in denim?
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Sean. So basically I'll be explaining today why I abstain from this motion. This House believes that Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean. So first of all, I would like to address some of the points made by the previous speakers. They have said that it is important to differentiate between migrants and refugees. Yes, that is correct. Refugees are people that seek asylum. Migrants move for all sorts of reasons. So it's important to define the people fleeing the Syrian crisis because they fear persecution, because they fear war, they fear death as asylum seekers. Second of all, it's important to state, it's important to differentiate whether Britain has failed migrants in the first place. Like the previous speaker said, to fail someone is to not prove their burden, or to fail someone is to imply that they have a responsibility in the first place. So this can be argued two ways. First of all, we can say that UK in the international community, they have a good global standing. But you also can say that other countries have good global standings as well. From a human rights perspective or from a wealth perspective, the US has a very good standing, Australia has a very good standing, Australia's army is mainly peacekeeping. So why are they not doing anything to help the crisis? So it's unfair to just pinpoint Britain in this crisis and say that they are at fault and they have failed, because in that sense, in that sense, you can say that everyone has failed. So yes, Britain can be said to have failed, but you also can argue whether UK has responsibility in the first place. So as I said just now, yes, they have global standing, they have veto power in the UN, they signed the UNHCR, they have very good human rights records. However, you also can say that we should be placing the onus on group organizations instead of just one country. If group organizations are the most empowered and the most emboldened to help this crisis, to alleviate the refugee crisis, as it should be, we cannot just, it will be unfair to target Britain and say that Britain is the source of all evil and Britain, along with other EU states, have failed their burden in this situation just because the refugees are landing on European shores. Then my next point will be about the media depictions. Everyone's reacting to photos, everyone reacts to media. However, we must be aware that these photos and these media will skew political mood. As in reported in The Guardian, David Cameron is expected to change his stance on the refugee crisis after the picture came out. So basically what a lot of Tories are saying is that David Cameron is only responding to the political mood. And this does not necessarily represent the ideas and intention of Westminster itself. So what does this say? It says that Britain as a state, as a government, does not truly believe that it has the moral obligation to help these refugees, which can be fine because in the wider context, the responsibility should be shared. If they can say that they have fulfilled their part of the burden by providing financial aid, which should make sense. However, the other people, just because they're reacting to such political media, they believe that UK should be the one that provides all the medical aid, should provide ground troops, for example, to secure the safe passage of refugees and stuff, which is just not possible. So there are many ways of arguing this, and I truly believe that you cannot say that Britain has failed, neither can you say Britain has succeeded, because this is still a project in progress, and it is unfair to draw conclusions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you to Sean for that excellent speech and abstention to this motion. And now I'm going to swing around once more for one final round of floor speeches. And to break them out, I'm going to ask for one floor speech in proposition to this motion. Someone else is straining so high that I have to take the gun in black.
Okay, being live streamed.
Hello, my name is Elaine, and I would like to draw attention back to the motion. This House believes that Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean. Now, I think it's really important that we look into who's Britain, because I understand in the debate we were focusing very much on the government, but who elects the government? The people, the public, the people of Britain. And we found that, so who is Britain? I would say that it's the government, of course, but it's the public as well. And if we compare these two components, it's the people that have the power. We found that with the emotive picture of Alan, just that one photo, because of the public, the very public reaction, that was enough for the government to then put in an implement to now say that, okay, we're going to take 20,000 migrants across the 5 years. So we have to look at, okay, it's the people, it's the public that have the power. So I would say, yes, Britain has failed the migrants crossing the Mediterranean, because it's the people with the power, it's all of us. We can see the power of our reaction, the power that our reaction can bring. We can make so much of a difference. So it's not just looking at the government in play right now, it's looking at us as members of this country, as nationalists.
On that point.
Yes.
A petition of over 200,000 people was run in just one day, and therefore Parliament debated this. How can we have failed as people if we managed to secure such a petition so quickly?
Sorry?
A petition of over 200,000 people to a petition to help the refugees in Syria, and this was passed through Parliament in a day.
Okay.
So quickly. So how, as people, have we failed?
Okay. When we say, okay, now we're talking about the topic of failure. For me, failure is something where you failed until you succeeded, really. Have we succeeded in resolving the migrant crisis? No, because it's still happening. So yes, even though we are still doing something, it's not resolved. So hence, I would say we have failed currently. Thank you. Also, it's very easy to throw technicalities and statistics in an attempt to justify our current actions. But the reality is, okay, whether they're migrants, whether they're asylum seekers, again, as what was said in the proposition, they're people. We are all people. The opposition mentioned that people have different needs and different desires. That is true, but we all have basic needs. Now, it's very easy for us to say, people have different needs, people have different desires, so why should one be greater than the other? Now, we all here have the basic needs. We have food, we have shelter, we have water, but it's not everyone that does. They are being deprived of this, which is why I think this is a humanitarian crisis, and we as human beings should be able to relate. We have a moral obligation to these people. It shouldn't be that there should be a law enshrined in order for us to help these people. So it shouldn't be a political obligation, but a moral obligation, because it's so easy in politics for us to look at the cold hard facts and forget the fact that we are actually humans. This is why I urge you to agree with this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine, for that excellent speech in proposition of this motion. And now, to make the second of the trio of three, I would like to take the final floor speech in opposition to this motion. Do I have a floor speech in opposition? It looks like I have one right there. Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Abdul Wahab, and I would be arguing against this proposition. So basically, what my point of view is that, according to the realist perspective of international politics, states do not have an obligation to accept these kind of refugees or residents of other states. Secondly, what I would like to point out is that even in England, like the households which are homeless is like 60,000 households are homeless in England. So rather than just spending taxpayers' money on these refugees and on humanitarian basis, they should rather care for their own citizens. Similarly, 7.8% of the UK's population is living below the poverty line, which is appalling for us. Like, they are going for humanitarian basis and then they cannot just maintain their own citizens. So these are my main points. So rather than just accepting those citizens on humanitarian basis, they should just go there and make their home safe for them. They should just help them and make Syria safe for them, rather than accepting these humanitarian. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the excellent final opposition speech we got there. And now for the final floor speech of the night and the final abstention floor speech, I would like to call someone who will put their hand up. I have got the guy in the red jumper.
I'm Rob. I'm an extension for this because I don't think there is a solution. As a human, I think it's appalling what's going on. I would never wish any of this on you, what they're experiencing. People wouldn't wish it on me. It's in our nature to do something. I really want to help them, but I can't. At the same time, when I was coming here, I was really hoping to hear a policy, something not just in the short term, something in the long term, sustainable that could, help solve it. But the problem is, I think governments are more interested in maintaining their political strength in Syria with all, the Russia, America going in, who's the world leader right now. They don't really care too much about what's going on. And in my opinion, that's wrong. Like I said, I just don't think there is a solution, and I haven't heard something sustainable, not a long-term solution to this. And that's my point of view.
Yeah, I'd just like to make the point that it's not so much the Russia and America don't care, but rather they care about the wrong things, that they are using whatever military force they're bringing to bear in Syria as a means to gain a political outcome that doesn't necessarily take into account the suffering given to the Syrian people. Like, say, Russia doesn't care who they're bombing as long as it helps Assad, and the West cares exclusively about corralling ISIL towards Assad's forces rather than shooting ISIL directly, and therefore ISIL isn't like Russia in 2 weeks has done a lot more than what the West has done in.
Yeah, I'm not debating who's done what. I'm just saying
I'm just making a point that it's not
priorities to me seem as if they care more about looking as the strongest, most dominant nation to everyone else, as opposed to helping people first. And also, I forgot this, I was going to say something. A problem I have with policies, say we take 20,000 people for 4 years. What happens to the 20,000 first person, the 20,000 second person? I don't think you can put numbers on this, because where do we draw the line? And also,
just a point of information which I've maybe didn't make clear on that 20,000, it's completely, that 20,000 figure is a complete failure for migrants who've already crossed the Mediterranean.
I'm not discussing whether it's. I'm just saying if we give a number, say, okay, then I'm not sure. I'm probably wrong. Then the UK. Well, no, actually, it is a 20,000 thing. Well, if a government says we will take a certain amount, X amount of people, what about the X plus one person? That's my view on this. And who says you have to be from a certain country to experience suffering? We keep referring to Syria. I think there's all over the world that people suffering. Why should we take someone based on where they're from as their? You didn't like the look. I don't like the look in your face on that song. It's not there.
Thank you for that excellent speech and abstention, which finishes off our floor speeches for the night. And so before we give out the prize to the winning floor speaker, and before we take the final vote, we now come to the summary speeches. Each side has 4 minutes within which to make their summary speech. They may split it equal 2 minutes each person, or have one person take all of it. So we'll have a 4-minute timer running, and the first side to make their summary speeches will be the opposition side, and I introduce them now.
Close to 7/8 of the people displaced by the Syrian conflict are still living in Syria or a bordering country. These people are out of sight and out of mind. We don't have heart-wrenching photos or stories about them, but they continue to suffer just the same, and our money alleviates more suffering for every pound we spend there than it does in Europe. And although it might seem robot-like, the only way to treat people fairly and treat people equally is to see how much suffering we can alleviate with our actions and how much per pound, instead of focusing on the stories and pictures which we might feel a particular emotional attachment to. And what are we doing for these people? We've given £1 billion. That's not a trivial amount of money. That's a huge amount of money, more than the rest of Europe combined, right? Germany is giving very little to these people who are most in need and who we can help the most, while taking lots of people in itself. And that means, with all the money we've given, that life is better in the camps than it would have been. Yes, they aren't perfect, but more people have more shelter and more food and medicine and whatever else they would have done before. And these are the real impacts of looking at this in a sort of economical way. And it also helps towards the long-term stability to have this money in the region setting up these camps, right? We're doing all we can. It's easy to dream of a solution. The truth is there is no solution until both Assad and ISIS are on, and that's a long way away. But no, we can't both give all this money and take lots of migrants. So as a share of our GDP, we've a lot more than most advanced nations, but it would cost a lot of money to take migrants, money which would come out of this budget. So every time you see someone say we should take more migrants, that is money which is coming out of the mouths and the shelter of these people in Syria and around Syria who also need it. And pretending that a trade-off does not exist does not mean it does not exist. There is no perfect world. It seems tragic. No, you can't offer them. To say to someone, to ignore that photo of that boy, it's a horrible thing to do. But the only way to be fair to everyone is to act in that way and to treat everyone equally, and then do the most where we can, because in Syria, which is why I believe the British government, by giving more than any other, the rest of Europe combined, has not failed the migrants or people. Thank you very much. I was going to run. I've got an important call, but.
Thank you. I do not believe, and the British people do not believe, that we have the same moral obligation to economic migrants as we have to asylum seekers. And as such, the implied obligations in the assertion that we are failing migrants crossing the Mediterranean, I think, is unfounded. If you believe that we should consider economic migrants and asylum seekers in exactly the same way and let them fall into exactly the same policy area, then you should vote in favour of the motion. But if you believe that asylum seekers and economic migrants should be treated differently, then you should absolutely vote against the motion. You, sir, asked where do we draw the line. I think the first place we draw the line is between those that are the most vulnerable, those that are genuine asylum seekers, and those that are economic migrants. And so you made the point that should we have an obligation as per British imperialism, as you put it, in the Middle East? Well, I don't think, if you're referring to the period of the British Empire, I don't think we have any obligation. If you're referring to the last 15 years of British foreign policy in the Middle East, where we went into Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and other countries, then I think we do have an obligation. And no part of this conversation can be considered, I think, whilst we are still, no conclusion can be reached, whilst we are still talking about bombing Syria further and going into the Middle East again. The long-term solution to the question you asked, sir, has to be to allow these countries to stabilise in their own right, so we don't have these vast movements of people across the world. Until we can do that, it's always going to be a problem. And frankly, I think going back into these countries, trying to install our own puppet government again and again, is surely only going to ensure that the situation carries on forever. Thank you very much.
And now, in the same 4-minute format, I would like to invite the proposition to make their summary speech.
Thank you. So I think one thing is clear, that we're definitely getting tangled up between economic migrants and refugees and asylum, and who's got a legitimate case and who hasn't. And, you know, as MSF, we're seeing the two groups that we're seeing most making that journey across the Mediterranean, the migrants that we are failing or we're not failing, are from Syria and Eritrea. So let's talk about Eritrea just for a quick moment. Eritrea, does anyone know very much about Eritrea? Not really. There's a dictator there and people trying to escape, and they get to Libya, and then they get people trafficked, and they have to work in horrendous conditions for no money, and they get beaten, and they want to get away, and they travel to Europe. So there they may have started as refugees, then they become trying to make a life for themselves. The boundaries between economic migrants and refugees are shifting, and we need to come up with a framework to respond to that that is basically not the one that we have at the moment. So I would say the system is broken. We don't know how to classify these people. We do know that we don't want them here in Britain, and therefore our policies are not helping them. So I'll just say, until we have a viable alternative, then I think we have to what we have at the moment, we can only be sure that we are failing. And I'd also say that one other point I wanted to make is we keep talking about the migrant crisis and the refugee crisis, and I know that the opposition thinks it's probably a bit too anecdotal and a bit too emotive, but I'd say it's actually an empathy crisis. You know, it's a lack of appreciation for people's situation, whether that be war, whether that be wanting to build a future for themselves and their family. So I call this the empathy crisis. And one last thing I'd like to put to you is whether you believe in helping people coming for economic reasons, which is a bit of a smokescreen. Economic reasons, refugees, asylum. I'd just like to say, how would you like to be remembered as a country, as Britain? And when you think about how we might like to remember those, you might like to think about whether we're failing or not. Second largest displacements in the largest displacements in the Second World War, and this is how we're responding. Thanks.
Goodness. So we've heard about economics, effective altruism, and public policy failures. And what's really interesting, I think, about this debate is what we've seen is a collision between politics and humanitarian action. And having sat in refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan and Calais and the like, I can tell you this is a crisis about protecting refugees. It's not about economics. Most, by far, of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees caseload are Syrians. And let's not forget, as you reminded us, the right to claim asylum is a right afforded to all of us, and that does create duties and obligations on every state that is a signatory to the convention that you mentioned. Effective altruism means for us as humanitarians meeting unmet humanitarian need, in our case unmet humanitarian medical need. To borrow a biblical analogy, it's not the job of humanitarians to sift the goats from the sheep or the asylum seekers from the refugees, from the migrants. Our mandate, our job, is to meet unmet humanitarian needs, and we will stick to that core mandate. But what we will say is, in reference to the specific of the debate this evening, is that the spectacular public policy failure is for EU states not to see and to name the refugee crisis in Europe for what it is, which is a major humanitarian emergency. And you said, we the people. Where are we the people? And I scowled at you very unfairly because I was thinking, how upset am I that you feel that you can't do something? So I mentioned it very, very briefly at the beginning, but I'm going to give you this before you leave, which is our letter to the Prime Minister, which you can copy, and you can write to him, and you can say, aid agencies have a 4-point plan, do something better, and we're in it together. So the answer actually is not more people like us, it's not endless humanitarian assistance, it is politics, and you are the ones that can change it.
I'd like to thank both sides for those excellent summary speeches, and I hope that they have given everyone, along with the floor speeches and the main speeches, a deeper understanding of this area of discussion. And with that in mind, I'd now like to take a vote on how you feel at the end of all this. So if I can get my volunteers down again, thank you. Okay, so of those of you who are still here, how many people think that they are now in proposition to the motion, this House believes that Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean? In proposition, in favour, for. Okay, and now, who would say that they are now in opposition to this motion? This House believes that Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean. You are in opposition to it. And finally, who thinks that they have become an abstainer? Who is in abstention to the motion? This House believes that Britain has failed migrants crossing the Mediterranean. Okay, excellent. That's our vote. And now, just a few little announcements before I announce the result of the vote. And of course, who won the floor speeches. Number one, next week's debate, which is this House believes the media's portrayal of race is the main cause of institutional racism. That is coinciding with Black History Month. It is happening in the main Cruciform Lecture Theatre, the biggest lecture theatre in UCL, and we hope to see many of you there to try your hand at winning that, to see discussion of a very interesting area and the very interesting speakers we have lined up. That's next week. This week, I would just like to again thank all the speakers who came for coming and for arguing very well. And I would secondarily like to thank the committee members, the officers of the MACE, who do the really hard work in getting speakers here and getting people to come along and making these such great events. Lastly, immediately after we're done here, I've announced the vote and announced the winner of the prize. We'll be going to the bar at TCR, which is our social venue after these Monday night debates. Come along, continue the debate with us, potentially with a few of the speakers in a more informal setting, and buy some of our slightly discounted booze. That'll be great fun. Okay, so first, the winner of the floor speech. We decided that I have a very bad memory for names. But in the end, we decided that the winner of the floor speeches tonight and the winner of either a bottle of port or a box of chocolates was Elaine. Unusual. And finally, the result of the vote. So, first I'll say what was the case before the debate, and then I'll say what was the case after. Before the debate, we had 121 people in proposition to this motion. We had 15 in opposition, and we had 18 abstentions. After the debate, bearing in mind that a few people left during, we had 71 people in proposition, we had in opposition 13, and in abstention 30. So to explain, we lost 50 proposition speakers, we lost 2 opposition speakers, and we gained 12 abstention speakers. So, to speak in terms of proportion, it seems that opposition proportionally lost the least, and abstention proportionally gained the most. So that's the result, I suppose. That's it, and I'll see you at the TCR now and in the Cruciform next week.
Thank you.